I'm Michelle Stone, and you're listening to Gospel Tangent.
The best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I am Rick Bennett. You know, it's been a long time since we've talked about Mark Hofmann. I've got a couple of his cousins who knew him growing up. So I'm excited to introduce Diane Smith and Michelle Stone. They're going to talk about some family stories, including some Post-Manifesto polygamy. Did that really upset Mark? And we're going to find out if that was a family secret or not. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I am excited to have two of Mark Hofmann's cousins on the show. We're going to find out some of the earliest stories of Mark. And so let's start with Diane. Can you go ahead and tell us who you are and where we are?
My name is Diane Smith, and we are meeting here in my house and in South Jordan.
All right. And your sister is?
Michelle Stone, and I don't know what you want me to say. Sorry, Rick. I'm the host of 132 Problems podcast, where I had Diane come on to talk to me about Mark Hofmann,
right,
and who is our cousin. And so we know a little bit more than some people know about Mark's early life.
And just to show our relationship, I'm number 1 of 9, and Michelle's number 9 of 9. And so Michelle and my oldest daughter graduated the same year from high school.
Oh, really?
And so we've got a little bit
friends.
of a different relationship that has but I would say we're about as close as sisters can be.
Yep.
So we love each other.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. That sounds like a very Utah family.
It is.
So
Yeah.
I know Mark, and actually before we go there, we're going to talk about Mark in just a minute. Why don't you give us a little bit more about your podcast? Just a little introduction.
Thanks. So it's an interesting conglomeration of events because my grandmother is the oldest daughter of Post-Manifesto polygamists, who are also Mark Hofmann's Post-Manifesto ancestors. And so, anyway, I was raised on all of the beautiful stories of polygamy, of how, our righteous ancestors lived polygamy, and I grew up totally believing in polygamy until I started studying it and had my mind blown that polygamy, I believe, was never ordained of God.
But you avoided all the pipe bombs.
The scriptures universally preach against it, and I felt inspired to share my journey, and so it's called a scriptural and theological case. I mean, look at the case for plural marriage.
All right.
So that's what the focus is.
So you and Mark kind of have something in common. You don't like Post-Manifesto polygamy.
Well,
True?
I don't think Mark had any problem with Post-Manifesto polygamy at all. I have no problem with Post-Manifesto polygamy. I have a problem attributing the errors of man to God. I think that destroys faith and testimonies. So I think it's better to find out who God really is, what God really ordains and teaches, and how God views his sons and his daughters. How God, father and mother, view their sons and their daughters.
Okay. And I think I made this joke to you before, but it wasn't on air. Are you going to stop at episode 132?
Yep, exactly. I was like, okay, how many years is that? A year, 2, 3 years? We'll see how it goes.
Because Lindsay Hansen Park had her podcast called A Year of Polygamy, and we're going on like year 10 now.
Oh, really? Is she still doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah, hers is very different from mine.
Yeah.
And so mine really is, let's get into the scriptures.
Yeah, so you're much more scriptures than history.
I'm an active, faithful member of the church, and I think that sometimes these can be difficult topics because speaking about polygamy can hit on other things like prophetic infallibility, so it can make people uncomfortable, but I think all of the answers are there in the scriptures, and if we're willing to ask the questions, we can always learn. God can teach us more.
One thing that I like about your podcast, though, is that it delves into a lot more than just polygamy.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you're talking about
Mark Hofmann.
Mark Hofmann,
That was how I found out about it.
Issues. I mean, it goes so far beyond just staying in that lane. It encompasses a lot of different things that I think are
it really speaks
helpful.
to the LDS experience. And I highly recommend it.
All right, everybody, go check it out. All right, so I'm a big, how do I say this? I have a great interest in the Mark Hofmann bombings. I don't want to say I'm a fan of Mark Hofmann because I'm not, but I'm a fan of the story. A huge
It's
fan.
fascinating. It is fascinating.
Yeah.
Some crazy Mormon history right there.
And so when we see pictures of Mark, they're all from like 1985, 1986. But I think, Diane, aren't you really close in age to him?
I'm a year younger than he
Okay.
is, and we lived about 2.5 blocks from where he grew up. And so we went to Olympus High School together.
Oh.
I graduated in 74 and he graduated in 73.
Oh, okay.
I should have brought my Letterman jacket.
Oh, there you
I
are.
have the green Letterman jacket. Mine's from sports.
Oh, okay.
Mark's was from chess club. So
Oh, really? So he he led
I
it
don't
in
know if
chess?
it was chess
I thought
club
you
or
said-
debate. It was something. It wasn't.
It wasn't
sports.
he was
athletics.
not athletic.
He was a great water skier.
Oh, I shouldn't speak. I didn't know him like you did.
Yeah,
He was a great water skier.
Wow. And so what are some of your early memories of Mark? It sounds like you probably knew him better than Michelle. Is that true?
Oh yeah.
Well. So
It's-
this is what. So should we tell the? Can we tell the ancestry really fast?
Sure.
And then do you
Okay,
mind?
go for it.
So just like Diane is the oldest of 9, I'm the youngest of 9, and I grew up with Diane's kids, right? So our grandmother is the oldest of 11, and Mark's mother is the youngest of 11.
Oh.
And our mother is our grandmother's oldest daughter. So our mother and Mark's mother had babies together and raised their kids together, right? So it's the same family
We call them
dynamic.
these Mormon crossover families because the cousins that would normally be first cousins actually are the parents of the cousins that you hung with. If that makes sense?
Generations
and
get
so
mixed up.
generations are all
because we have
screwy.
big family. I have 13 children, and I have children younger than my oldest grandchildren. So that's how it works, right?
This is so, I want to
Mormon.
say Utah County, but you guys grew up in Salt Lake County,
We
right?
did.
Yes.
And so both of
And-
you both lived in Salt Lake, grew up
Oh,
in Salt
yeah,
Lake?
yeah.
Both went to Olympus?
And I do have to clarify, I was not a friend of and a close associate of Mark. He really was very distant in a lot of ways. I had time in their home. I was more friends with his older and younger sister than I was with him because he was not very difficult to get to know and have that kind of a relationship. Very much, I don't want to say condescending, but either you were his kind of people or you didn't exist, type of a
Oh, wow.
type of a thing.
Even for cousins, huh?
Oh yeah, and so, which was fine. I was friends with his wife and worked with his wife, and so
Years later.
of course, years
Yeah.
later, but and so I was on the periphery of his life. I was not a close associate. I just
Okay.
want to make sure that that's clear.
Well, I know Shannon Flynn has, when he described Mark, said, today we would call him a nerd. Is that a reason?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I mean, just way into the things he was into, chess, and if there had been computers back then, he would have been a computer nerd.
That's what Shannon said,
Yes,
actually. Yeah.
yes.
And so, it was kind of a bookworm, was he? Mm-hmm. So, was he reading a lot?
I don't know. I don't
'cause you
know.
didn't
I
hang
know
out.
he always had
He was
stuff
smart.
going on. He was brilliant, smart. And one of the things that that was not in the show, the movie
Murder Among the
about
Mormons.
Murder Among the Mormons that we talked about is an experience when I was probably 11, 12, 13, and so Mark was right around that age. He had a chemistry set. Those were the kinds of things that he loved.
I
And
got it for Christmas, I think. It was a big, exciting present. That's what I've been told.
I don't know that, but he made a bomb and blew himself up in the basement, and it was the first.
A
Do we
pipe
know
bomb?
he made a bomb? We know he blew himself up in the basement experimenting with explosives, but
Yes,
we don't know
well,
if he...
if you're
Okay,
experimenting with explosives, what are you doing?
He blew himself up with a chemistry set.
In the basement.
Yeah.
And of his house. And it was the first time I had actually had the experience of fasting for a family member who had burns,
They called a family fast.
They called
It
a
was so
family
serious.
fast for him.
wow.
And I was so surprised that in all of the stuff, nobody ever mentioned that, but maybe it was just known in the family
Yeah.
that he
He'd blown himself up as a young
He was playing with his
teenager.
chemistry set and blew himself up. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, so he just had severe burns. He didn't lose any fingers or
Right,
anything.
right. No, and,
That came
and nothing
later.
that nothing that was permanent. But I do remember them calling a family fast, and my folks explaining to me what it meant. And so I don't know how old I was, young enough that I hadn't really known and understood what it meant to fast for a specific person for a specific event like
Oh,
that.
wow.
So that was.
Can I share something really fast? Just because I made a joke and all of a sudden it hit me. Like the reason that Diane and I talked about this was to share, like I guess I'm just going back in time thinking of that family worried about their son. And like we tend to talk so much about Mark Hofmann that we lose the humanity of the story. Like our reason of talking about it was to tell the story of his mother, you know, because I think that gets left out. We are just all looking at this, you know, this horrible tragedy that's like a big traffic accident, that, you know, but the human toll has been brutal.
Yeah.
You know, really brutal. And so these caring, loving parents that provided for their son, that called a family fast, that, you know, and their story. So I want to be careful to not lose the humanity and the care and the love. Like I kind of feel like Aunt Lou is still living. Mark's mother is still alive, and there's a lot of care for her. I think we all try to be very careful because,
And protective of her.
Yeah, like this new movie being made. Like every time something comes out, you know, it hits hard because they were. Well, do you want to talk about? Can we talk about Mark's parents a little bit? Because there
Sure.
tends to be a focus on, you know, everyone's like, "Whoa, what did they do wrong?" When you have a kid turn out like this, and so I think it's useful to talk a little about them.
It's so interesting because so many of the things that children do that are heinous, you think, what happened? I mean, it's like, what did Jeffrey Dahmer's mother serve for dinner that caused that? You know, and it wasn't necessarily anything. He just chose, and Mark just chose, because that family was close, and they were active, and they were loving, and they were awesome to each other, and to their neighbors, and to their family. And you get this kid that makes choices that, of course, it reflects on the family. But the family should not be responsible for the choices that he made any more than you would take all the credit for a kid that did wonderful things.
Yeah, like just I think we all know there are really awesome parents who have some really messed up kids sometimes. There are really terrible parents who the kids can just rise above and be amazing humans,
Like Abraham
right?
Lincoln's
So that kind of stuff
dad,
can
you know?
happen,
Yeah.
and I really think this is one of those cases. You know, like of course you can see bad parenting can have bad results. But well, can we talk about Uncle Willie for?
Sure.
I mean, I think
We're just taking over. You ask a question and we'll answer.
We're all about tangents here, so we can go down any tangent you want. Let's
Well,
do it.
just they made a point of how sort of controlling or demanding or strict Uncle Willie was, and you had like him teaching all the cousins to water ski. Every year they would have a giant family reunion at Bear Lake, and he had a boat,
And he spent hours teaching all of us that didn't have the opportunity to grow up with a boat. And over the years, I learned to water ski, I learned to slalom, I learned to do all of those things because he was so patient and kind with us. And he would get up really early in the morning or stay out really late after all of us were done, and he would just drive with Mark, and Mark would ski for an hour or two.
So this doesn't sound like a
Just-
strict disciplinarian.
well,
Oh.
and he was okay. Anyone who's ever taught kids to water ski, that's hard. That could be like, keep the tips up, keep them, you know, and everyone else on the boat is yelling and like it tested the patience of our dad, who's a really
Yeah.
patient guy. And so knowing that Uncle Willie, Diane was his great niece, right? And he's out there like so kindly for entire days at a time with all of these big families with 9, 12, 13 children, teaching all these kids to water ski. Like that's who he was. He
And-
was a kind, gentle man.
And you look at how many parents back then were strict and had expectations for their kids. And did that cause all of those kids to
Right.
become
Psychopaths.
and murderers and bombers. No, of course it didn't. To say, in our house you go on a mission, in our house we read the scriptures, in our house we say prayers, in our house we go to church.
Well, we don't even know if he did that.
And we don't have any idea.
You know.
But I'm just saying that having expectations for your family does not mean in any way
That they're going to grow up to be
that you're
serial
a negative
bombers.
parent. In fact, I would say that the parents that say, do whatever you want, there's no expectations here, that's a much worse way to raise children than having.
Anyway, there's a big sidetrack to go. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
tangent?
Realizing-
Is that what
there's
you're
a
talking
there's
about?
a gospel tangent, but it is good for parents to hear. Cut yourself some slack. Apologize for what you need to apologize for in your parenting, and when you see things happen, like when you think about Mark Hofmann, give a little prayer for his mom. I mean, seriously, she is a good woman, and we'll talk a little bit more. But you go ahead and talk about the beach.
Okay, but I do want to say one thing that's been very helpful for me when I've screwed up with my kids. I just told them I would keep putting quarters in their counseling jar. And every time I would screw up, I would tell them, here's a quarter. And it got to the point that they'd come in and say, Mom, I need a quarter. And I'd say, yep, you sure do. Because we all screw up and we all make mistakes. And if a parent raised their children absolutely perfectly, then the parents did horrible, because the kids would say, you raised me so good, you never taught me to deal with adversity and how to say I'm sorry when you made mistakes, because you never made a mistake. And so even then they would have done it wrong. And so there's no perfect way that you can be a parent. Just lots of...
You're right. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, and I think that Aunt Lou and Uncle Willie were very good parents. So I think that it's good to not try to blame them for the heartbreak that they endured. Sorry, it's hard to know what they experienced. So
It's also, don't judge, because you never know what your kids are going to grow up and end up doing and being. And so we have to be really, really careful.
So I want you to talk about the beach.
Okay. I will talk about the beach. When we were, Mark always loved gizmos and the newest and greatest of, technology. Anything that was coming out, he was really into that.
And their family only had 3 kids, where most of the other families had, so they had more.
Oh, I was going to ask. So Mark came from a small
family.
2 sisters, middle child of 2 sisters.
Yep. And so he had a metal detector. And it was really cool, because most of us had never seen that before. And like I said, every single year we went to Bear Lake and had a 3-day family reunion. That, for us, was the only vacation that we had the whole time I was growing up, was those 3 days at Bear Lake.
But it was every year?
Every year. And
was this Grandma Sears' family? So Grandma Sears is Mark's grandmother, who was married in 1906. Right? He knew his grandmother. You knew your great-grandmother.
So
Absolutely.
2 years after the second manifesto.
Yeah, so I've tried to say, is it post-manifesto polygamy? But in our family history, so Grandpa
Sears.
Grandpa Sears, he and his first wife were married and had no children. So he either asked permission or was called by Joseph F. Smith, the president of the church. He met with him. We're not sure who instigated it, because we have a different accounts.
Oh, wow.
But got permission or was called by Joseph F. Smith to go to Mexico and take a second wife in 1906.
The same guy who issued the 1904 manifesto?
This is our family history, so it's
Wow.
so he, and in any case, he was an active, faithful member in high callings. He served as mission president several times.
And he took his first wife on his missions.
He was told he could only take one wife, and he left the one with all of the children home to fend for herself.
Oh, my.
Doing all of
It's
that.
close to home. Yeah. So our grandmother's the oldest daughter. She got married much later because she was working so hard to provide for that family. Well, So anyway, so Mark's. What was the point I was making? Just saying.
That's who was at the
family reunion was. So also because they claim that Mark found out they had
Yeah, I mean, that's been the big thing. Like, he discovered the secret. And I love that.
Nonsense. It's so stupid. It's so stupid.
Because we all knew.
It was his grandma. His grandma was, so the first couple were 40. They waited for Athelia to turn, I can't remember if it was 16 or 18. I can remember. They waited for her to get old enough to get married.
I don't know.
And some of our family lore is they were never alone together. So Aunt Aggie was always there.
On the dates.
On
the
their
two of them
dates.
courted her together.
Yep.
But then Aunt Aggie told him he had to go when he proposed by himself, and it made him cry because he didn't want to.
Because he didn't want to hurt Aunt Aggie. It's just so sad from top to bottom.
Just all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So that was Mark's grandmother is that young second wife. And she might be one of the last LDS polygamists because she was 16 in 1906 when she got married. So it's kind of the tail end, definitely. But she was still, you knew her well. She lived. She
actually was lived in Ogden and was hit by a car when I was in early high school, I think. Mm-hmm. And so
that's what killed her.
She was 86, I think, something like that.
Something like that. And so we knew her and we knew this history. And so again, people that are standing on the outside want to attribute all these emotions and feelings and this is why he did this, but they don't know what they're talking about because it was our family and we knew. All of us knew.
I grew up looking at pictures. Oh, there's Aunt Aggie. There's Grandma Sarah. Didn't know them. She passed away before I was born, but they were already gone before I was born, and I knew, it was his grandmother. And so, like I said, the only way he would not have known is if he was so narcissistic that he didn't have a clue what color his grandmother's hair was. Do you know what I mean? Like, he just didn't know anything about anyone's life, because it was
it was all out there.
Maybe he learned that their wedding date was 1906, or, but none of us had any kind of a problem with it. We were raised that polygamy was beautiful and the law of Zion and the celestial kingdom.
Yeah. Stories about Aunt Aggie.
Yeah. Stories of Aunt Aggie and Grandma Sears. Yeah. So anyway, we
don't have any documentation that Joseph F. Smith signed the wedding certificate or anything.
Because he went to Colonial Juarez. Was it Colonial Juarez, I think, or Colonial?
Is there a journal entry or anything, or?
They were married in the Salt Lake Temple.
No, they were married in Mexico.
Are you sure? Mm-hmm. Because I had heard they were married in the temple and then they went down to Mexico separately.
Nope. Okay. Well, I just looked it up. February 21st, 1906, Chihuahua, Mexico, is what the said.
But
so I would
then
be interested. But in any case, he was called into all kinds of high callings.
Yeah, he was a mission president in Samoa several different times, opened up Samoa. And so it wasn't, and it was known. Mm-hmm. The church leaders stayed at their home in Ogden. And so this was not an under the table or a unsanctioned marriage.
And I do have to tell one.
It's weird that you say that because it's 1906. How can it not be under the table?
Well, it was in Mexico, and I think that there was still we're not doing it in America, but Canada and Mexico.
Well, I had heard that he was marrying them as the president of the priesthood, not as the president of the church.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yes.
That's right. He said, "Brother, I am calling you as the president of the priesthood, not as the president of the church." I forgot that. That's really important.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we were told our whole lives, that it was the president of the priesthood.
Not the president of the
Which
church.
is why it was so interesting to me when we were selling Bright Music. Our mom is Janine Brady that did Bright Music. I'm a Mormon.
This is so mind-boggling because it was 1906 when Matthias Cowley and who was the other apostle?
John W. Taylor?
John W. Taylor got excommunicated.
No, that was 1911 that John W. Taylor got excommunicated. I thought someone's going to check and put it in the comments. Someone knows.
I'll have to look it up.
But I thought it was 1911, but I could be wrong.
I'm pretty sure David O. McKay got called in 1906 as an apostle.
Okay, well, I trust you more than me.
To replace, one of the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we come
Maybe
from.
they were doing it in
Here, I'm
America.
gonna-
That's the problem.
You guys keep talking. I'm gonna look it up on my phone. If I
Okay,
can find it.
it was only allowed in Mexico and Canada, but I did read one history that said he had a dream or something that he was supposed to have children.
A blessing that said he would have a huge posterity.
And so that's why, and they were still doing plural marriage in Mexico. So he went down there for the purpose of finding, and he married the bishop's daughter. You know, she was the bishop's daughter. And I have to tell this story really fast because these are some of the stories that we were raised on, all the happy, sweet stories of polygamy. But then as soon as I started asking questions, some other stories came out. And so if one of my cousins wants to correct, but this is what I was told is that, so they had their first little baby, that second wife, Athelia, had her baby Agnes, who's our grandmother. And as soon as she was old enough to be weaned. So did you know that Agnes, the baby, was named after Agnes, the first wife, right?
Oh, wow.
Athelia was the second wife. And so William and Agnes left Athelia home while they took baby Agnes on the grand tour to introduce her, to show all of their family and friends their new baby. And it makes me kind of sad. That little 17-year-old mom was left home alone while they took her baby on the grand tour to introduce her around. So it's pretty, and I think that Grandpa Sears was trying to protect the feelings of his first wife. There'd be so much heartbreak, the feelings of the second wife, but there were just a lot more stories came out that just break your heart. Mm-hmm. They're really, really
well, it's like
sad.
Aunt Vi.
The story of Aunt Vi.
Yeah,
Are you interested in polygamy stories of our family, or just
no?
the Mark
Okay,
Hofmann
we'll
stuff?
go back to Mark Hofmann another time. We can
You can edit it.
stories.
Well, we talk about it all. But let's jump back to Mark for a minute because I know in fact, I have a picture of his business card as like a teenager. Mark's Mint Mistakes, where he was forging coins and trying to make coins more expensive because of the certain stamp or whatever.
Well, tell the beach story. I interrupted that because I wanted to say this was Grandma
was that related to
Sears'
the coins?
family. That was her family. So
this is
you tell the story.
This goes way into the psychology
Of who he was.
And so
he
here
has a
we
metal
are.
detector.
Yeah, he has a metal
Hundreds
detector,
of
and
kids there.
we're on the beach with all these little kids. And so Mark walks down the beach with his metal detector, and every time it would buzz, there was a whole group of all these kids that were following him, and they would dig up whatever was there. And so up and down the beach.
Which I now wonder if he had planted stuff.
I don't know.
Because he did that with his friends.
I don't know.
Okay.
Have no idea. But he would go up and down, and then all of a sudden, the metal detector went off like crazy. And they dug a little bit and couldn't find it, and he said, well, obviously there's something in here. And so this whole group of little kids started digging this pit on the beach. And he would come by every half hour or so and stick the metal detector in this hole, and it would just go off like crazy. He'd say, there's something big in here. And these
Of course,
kids
it's pirate treasure. They were expecting to find pirate treasure.
sweating, and they went in and they got spoons, and their little fingernails, as they were digging in this sand, were all...
Because you said it was hours when they
It
could have
was
been playing in the
hours.
water. They could
And
have been.
I would
this was
come
their
by
vacation.
and say, guys, why don't you go play in the water? Why there are so many things to do? No, there's a big thing. Mark is here, and there were a ton of kids
And you
that were
said some
digging.
of them had like bleeding fingernails.
Yeah,
from
because
digging.
they were digging with their fingers every time he'd come by. Finally, they got this big pit dug in the sand, and Mark came by and stuck it in, and it didn't go off. And then he just started laughing.
They were all
He had
shocked.
rigged it so that he could make it go off at will, and took these kids' entire day on their vacation just so he could laugh at them.
And then you guys are such idiots. You're so stupid.
And their
And
fingers
that-
are bleeding, and
Yes.
he's just a cruel person.
That's why everyone in our family remembers that, because you were livid.
Oh, I
they
was
were
so
her little
angry.
brothers and sisters.
I was so angry, and I kept trying to get him to come, and they said, "No, Mark,
There's something like they thought they were finding pirate treasure or something. They were children,
and that was the epitome at that point that encapsulated who he was and how he wanted to manipulate people, to make fun of them, and to control that situation in such a cruel way.
Wow.
Because I think it's a unique experience to come into the face of that kind of malevolence, to be met with those little children that had been looking at him as a hero, and then he's like, "You guys are such idiots." Everyone there remembers that experience.
He was born a sociopath.
Yes.
Well, and that's why attributing, he was active Mormon, and then he wanted to
found out this family secret, which
he was
wasn't
so
a secret.
betrayed. It was very different than that.
He was just a cruel person.
And that's so sad to have that in your family. And when we were in, I remember having a family fireside in our ward. We met in Rosecrest Ward, there on
Is this
23rd.
when he, in the 80s?
23rd
when he was
East.
showing his...
Yeah.
Okay.
And he had a slideshow of all of his discoveries.
So they wanted all the
And-
family to come see it.
All the aunts and uncles and cousins that were there, everybody was there. People just absolutely bursting their buttons.
His mom and dad
because
on the front row, so just proud of their boy.
as he went through these slides and went through the whole process of how he had found this and how he got started, and this was the first thing that I found, and this was the steps that...
This was where I found it. This is how I tracked it down.
And he went through this whole production for the people that loved him, that were the nearest and dearest. And the whole thing was a sham and a show. And so
And he
it
had nothing
wasn't...
to gain in that family.
It wasn't just for financial gain. It wasn't just for notoriety. There was something wrong.
It was just, I'm smart and you're all are stupid.
I think it's that dark triad, that Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic. Like truly, some people just come that way. I'll tell the story that our other cousin shared with me when I was calling, doing a little bit of research. She was really close with them, so their two families grew up together, right? Practically next door. They were cousins, and she was the youngest of the group. So her older brother was Mark's age, and then then there were Mark's two sisters, and she was a little bit younger than them, and they were all gathered together playing the board game Life. And she was losing. She was the littlest, And then something happened. Something happened where all of a sudden she won. It was really, that's life. She won. And she said that she just got to where she was like, "Oh, I won!" And her brother, who was Mark's age, started to say, "Good job," And before anything, Mark picked up the board, put his hands under the board, flipped it so it went flying across the room. The pieces went everywhere. And she said that the look on his face of just this hatred and anger and that it scared her, it shocked her. And so there was something there from the beginning that was very wrong, very wrong. So it's that same kind of a thing, just only self-serving, And I think the beach story really gets at it, because children, to do that to children, and then to be that competitive and that need to be better than everybody it's telling, right? And I think your point about the meeting was his mom and dad sitting on the front row, and Grandma Sears was there. And
all just so proud of him.
Also, and it was all a lie. Mm-hmm.
And so did you go to you went to high school with him, but you probably, you didn't interact with him very much, basically?
No. We were in totally different circles, and...
Was he popular? Okay.
So did people know that you guys were cousins? Because you probably had different last names.
Right. I was Brady, but I don't know that it was even a real big deal.
Nobody cared.
Who cares? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're
So-
cousins once removed. I should clarify. It's our mom that's Mark's first cousin, right? Like,
But
but you guys are the same
But
age.
yes, we're the same age. So we were contemporaries. I mean, it's crossover
You
families.
got to be a genealogist to understand all
Yes.
that, I think.
Or a Mormon.
Yeah, the joke about in a Mormon wedding, it's the mother of the bride that's
I know.
pregnant.
I was never pregnant at one of my kids' weddings. My claim to fame. Okay. So anyway, those are a couple of stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Anything else? So the Mark made a mistake. You don't have anything about coins or anything growing
No.
up? Because apparently he was into magic as well. He liked to do magic
Yeah,
tricks.
magic shows, magic tricks.
Do you remember any of
just
those?
Sleight of hand, so that it was, it was just putting the,
wool
getting
over
the
someone's
best
eyes.
over somebody. That was important to him.
Oh, so that's why he was drawn to magic, was
Yeah.
to fool people.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it's the same type of a thing.
I'm tricking
And the
you.
sleight of
You
hand
can't tell
and
what I'm doing.
all of those things. When
A desire to deceive. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Diane Smith and Michelle Stone. In our next conversation, Diane will talk about her reaction when she found out Mark had been injured by a bomb.
I knew. I remember exactly where I was. It's a seminal moment of where I was in the car that I thought, oh, well, that makes sense.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe at gospeltangents.com or on patreon.com/gospeltangents, or you can watch entire videos at youtube.com/gospeltangents. I really can't do this without your support. I'd love to do it full time, and I need a lot more people that are willing to help me out. So I'd really appreciate that. So thanks again for listening, and don't forget to check out some of our other videos.